Hi Arnav, hi Ishan. We'll start at 8 o'clock. We're waiting for more people to join in. In the meanwhile, if you guys are not awkward, could you please introduce yourself, maybe in just a sentence or two? Thank you.
Hey there. I'm sorry if I'm like barely audible because I'm taking this call from a public place. But yeah, I'm quite excited about this session. This is my first session as a part of um, I guess, the Rhizome Society Cafe. Um, I'm a researcher in philosophy. My primary research interests right now deal with cultural constructs, mostly such as things like nationality and gender. And naturally, Deleuzean ontology is the background of a lot of my work. But I have, in the past, only really engaged with um, things like Nietzschean philosophy, Anti-Oedipus, and The Thousand Plateaus. So I'm relatively new to difference interpretation, and yeah, looking forward to it.
Oh wow, that's good to know. We're happy to have you, Ishan. Anyone
Thanks,
else?
I'm happy to be here.
Anyone else wants to go? Hi again. We will wait another 5 minutes. And in the meanwhile, if you guys are interested in introducing yourself, if you don't mind, uh, please go ahead. Anybody? Fine. I'll give an introduction about the group. So we're a student collective, and of course, as you guys know, we just engaged with reading Deleuze's work and trying to get his philosophy better. And it was founded by Mohit. He's a master's student in philosophy from Chennai, and I am Nancy. I'm a PhD scholar at Center of Philosophy, JNU. And today session will be facilitated by me. And I think that's all about the group. If you guys want to join, you can connect with us on Instagram, WhatsApp. We have a community of 40, 50 members on WhatsApp now. Uh, so yeah, thanks for joining in, and we're happy to have you today. We'll wait another 5 minutes for maybe Moe to join. Thank you for waiting.
Hello, can I speak? Can you hear me?
Yeah, please, sure, go ahead.
Okay, so my name is Hermenegildo. You can call me JR. I'm from Philippines. So it's a way long distance. So I'm a PhD student also here. And I really want to, since I've been studying Deleuze, okay, on my own. So I just want to look for a guided reading, at least to have conversation or to to have a community to talk with, maybe to identify also if my reading, okay, is guided or the same with your reading. So that's what I'm here for, and hopefully I can learn from you. And the least thing that I can do is to contribute also. So that's it. Thank you.
Oh wow, that's lovely to know, Harmony. I cannot
JR,
get.
yeah.
Could you
You can call
repeat?
me JR. It's a long name.
Yeah. By the way, we're happy to have you, and looking forward to your active engagement and participation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Yelmaz and Sohini. We're happy to have you again. I think we'll start now. Mm, so wait, I'll share my screen. Mm, yeah, is my screen visible to everybody?
Yes.
Yeah, section two.
Yes.
All right. So I'll give a bit of a recap of what we. So this is the second session of the reading, and in the previous session we discussed how Deleuze opposes repetition to generality from the three points of view: from the point of view of conduct, law, and representation. So in the prior session we covered how he opposes generality from viewpoint of conduct and law, and he defines conduct in terms of habit and law in terms of natural and moral law, and how he brings in Nietzsche and Kierkegaard in order to critique Hegel's notion of movement and from the viewpoint of, and Kant's notion of categorical imperative and moral law. And uh, and then today we will study how he critiques representation in terms of generality. And then he defines generality in terms of substitution and exchangeability. And repetition is something that is necessary and justified conduct in relationship to that which cannot be replaced. So it's non-substitutable and non exchangeable. So it's a singularity. And we also trace the history of ontology from pre-Socratic times, from Thales to Anaximander, Anaximenes to Aristotle, of course, and then Plato, and then modern philosophy in times of Kant and Hegel, and then how we went to Heidegger, and then how Heidegger marks the important point of departure in philosophy, where he initiates an ontological difference or an ontological turn in philosophy, where he formulates being in terms of difference and temporality, and which Deleuze, of course, takes up in his difference and repetition and kind of builds on that. So, in a way, it's an extension of being in time. So, in the last session, we covered all of this. If you guys are interested, you can maybe listen to the video, it's there on our YouTube channel. And today we will move to the third aspect, where where he's critiquing representations in terms of generality. So we move to conceptual blockage here. And conceptual blockage, so he discusses two types of conceptual blockages. There are natural blockages and artificial blockages. And there are under natural blockages, there are three different types of natural blockages, which is blockage in terms of discrete extension, and then natures of concepts of nature, and then concepts of freedom. We will get into that subsequently. So conceptual blockage, a concept can be blocked for Deleuze at the level of each of its determinants or each of the predicates that it includes. An object becomes block when it falls short of completely specifying an object's singularity. So what Deleuze is doing here, he's drawing from Leibniz, and what Deleuze thinks that Leibniz is the only philosopher in the history of philosophy who tries to get to the closest in capturing the object in its singularity. Everyone else that is done before him, for example, since the time of Aristotle, people have tried to come up with a notion of concept or an object or the being of all beings when you say, but that being is always within the realms of identity for Deleuze. It's never pure difference or it's never conceptual difference that you get to. And Leibniz comes closest to formulating that conceptual difference, for example, when he formulates his monad in terms of a substance itself. So, now a monad is something. So, another concept that becomes very important here is the concept of extension and comprehension, and which is something that Deleuze borrows from, Antoine Arnaud's Port Royal Logic, which was a correspondence which Anton wrote as a correspondence between him and Descartes, where he critiques Descartes. And then from there, Deleuze borrows the concept of extension and comprehension. So when you have an extension, for example, the definition of extension is extension of a concept could be how many things in the world it includes. For example, how many things could you place inside that concept, and a comprehension would be how many predicates you can attach to that concept. And these are both inversely proportional. For example, if extension is one, comprehension will be infinite. So the more deeper or the more streamlined you go into of course defining a thing, when you're trying to capture its singularity, the uniqueness of that thing, so you can only you capture the uniqueness if your extension is one. If your extension is greater than one, then there'll be two identical things, and then again you do not have the uniqueness. So extension has to be one, and then comprehension has to be infinity. And the more you capture it in extension in terms of one, the infinite or more your comprehension or your predications of that concept become. So they're always inversely proportional. But Deleuze feels that even when Leibniz is trying to capture the object in its singularity, he is still dealing with the realm of repetition. Sorry, he is still dealing with the realm of representation or resemblance. He's not getting to a concept of difference. He's getting to a conceptual difference, but he's not getting to a concept of difference. And what Deleuze will do with its difference in itself, he'll get to a concept of difference in itself, as opposed to representational or uh, uh, difference in terms of generality. So Deleuze feels that artificial blockage, you can think of artificial blockage in terms of the taxonomic differentiation that we dealt with in Aristotle's ontology of metaphysics, where he says that every genus is divided into genera, and then every genera is divided into species, and every species is divided into animals, and then animals are further divided into humans and non-humans. And but even within specific individuals, within specific humans, there is a difference, but that difference is always subsumed within the larger identity of the species, for example, the animal. So even when Aristotle tries to conceptualize difference, he's doing in a way which is again subsumed under the identity principle. So difference is not liberated. So that is a sort of artificial blockage that Deleuze critiques in Aristotle, and then Hegel also when he gives his conception of identity in difference, where he's trying to get to the concreteness, but for Deleuze that concreteness again remains very abstract from itself. For in itself to for itself and again. So this is something that we've covered in the previous session. You can check it out if you guys are interested. And then artificial blockage, comprehension of a concept. Yeah, we've covered this. And then any attempt to generate enough predications for a concept such that the concept repeats its singularity fails in every case, even though it might appear to uniqueness of a thing through a real use. It still operates in the domain of mediation or representation or resemblance. Thus, principle of difference, understood as difference in the concept, allows the greatest space possible for apprehension of resemblances. The question of what difference there is may always be transformed into what resemblance there is. So Deleuze inverts this. Deleuze is, if you're speaking in terms of like Aristotelian division, you'll say always speak of in terms of resemblance instead of asking what difference is there between different individuals. For Deleuze, it's always resemblance that there is between them, because it's always subsumed under the identity principle. So it's more resemblance and less difference. But above all, in classification, the determination of species imply and suppose a continual evaluation of resemblances. So when he tries to get to a concept of difference in itself as opposed to conceptual difference, he will initiate a move away from mediation or representation. And then coming to natural blockage. Now, natural blockage will be of three types: discrete extension, the alienated concepts of nature, and the repressed corresponding concepts of nature. into which are nominal concepts, concepts of nature, and concepts of freedom, respectively. And discrete extension will be, it's a concept, if you take a concept with finite comprehension and forcibly assign it a place in space and time. So here what happens is they're not inversely proportional. So extension and comprehension are not inversely proportional. So even if you increase the extension, if it becomes greater than 1, the comprehension will still remain same or finite. It will not go to infinity, or it will not decrease or increase. So discrete, for example, if you have a concept of a horse that has finite comprehension, that is, it has like finite predicates, and so it's four-legged mammal that people ride. But if we forcibly assign it a place in space and time, we make it that is here and now. We do it here and now. Like, we're trying to capture it in its uniqueness, so we forcibly assign space and time to it and then try to capture it here and now. Thus, by doing it, now the concept of horse that should refer to multitude of objects now only refer to one horse. But Deleuze is again saying that you're not getting to a difference here because it increases the number of extensions. So the moment you have definite predicates, but then you impose space and time, so within definite predicates, your extensions will increase. The extension will never go to one because that is not singularity again. And then comprehension, that extension are not in inverse relationship here. So some sort of parameter which is beyond our control, and he gives the example of language here, how words function. It ends up fixing or limiting the conceptual grasp of the thing in the world, and this limitation leads to a proliferation and dispersal of that thing. So he gives the example of word and how if we have definition for them that comprise a set of predicates, it does not apply to each individual usage. So if I say X, it could mean this or that, right? X does not have to refer to just one thing. It could either be this or that. And then thus there is nothing essential about the word that would make it correspond to predicates. Therefore, what happens is the definition of it, that is, a concept of the word as a thing in the world, is nominal. That is, it exists only in letter and not in the naming itself. Uh, now, again, when I say X could be this or that, so it does not resemble each other. So this one thing that I refer to will not resemble the other thing that the X refers to, but it repeats. So this sort of repetition happens. But this is again negative repetition for Deleuze because it's still within the realm of generality and identification. With there's a common word that attaches, that is the identity principle between differences of the referents. So here also what happens is the concept of words are thus naturally blocked from having infinite comprehension. That is an innumerable set of predicates and inversely end up referring to more than one thing in the world. Therefore, extension becomes greater than one. And the theory of one is to one, which Leibniz propounds, that is, for every object we could have a unique concept, that fails again because the extension rises again. So this is very akin to what Derrida is also doing, where he he gives the conception of trace, which is common to all words. But we're not dealing with Derrida here, so moving on. Then he'll give his concept of nature, and then concepts with indefinite comprehension can subsume perfectly identical objects. So again, here he is bringing in Kant, and there's a famous debate that happened between Leibniz and Kant, Leibniz and Newton, where Newton propounded an absolute space and Leibniz propounded a relative space. So for Newton, space is there; it's a pure form of intuition, and everything that presents to us is presented in absolute space. But Newton kind of like critiques it, and when he brings the notion of relative space, and Newton through that will, and through his theory of identities, principle of sufficient reason, and identity of indiscernibles, will try to give a conceptual difference to things. That is, when monads become concept in themselves or substances in themselves, as opposed to Aristotelian metaphysics or ontology. And then so again, in his critique of Leibniz, he will bring in Kant, because Kant says that even if you go infinity in your comprehension, that is, even if you have a monad or a one concept per thing, even then you cannot get to the singularity, because, and he brings in the Kant's argument of incongruent, incongruent these counterparts, where Kant critiques Leibniz by saying that even if you go deep enough, you cannot, the space and time will always vary. So, for example, if you have a thing and if you have a concept for that particular thing, and if you have an image of the thing, the image and the thing will be in different times, although you have just one thing and it's identical, so the image will always also be identical. So you have two things because those two things are in different coordinates of space and time. So that is how Kant critiques Leibniz's notion of this capturing of singularity by one concept. Because if you go deep in, because space and time for Kant are non-conceptual, they are prior pure forms of intuition. So, and this can't cause an internal difference within things. So there's a paradox of symmetry argument from incongruent counterparts that show the existence of internal difference within things. So it's a difference in the world that can't be captured by our conceptual understanding, that is differences between incongruent counterparts. Although they are conceptually identical, their non conceptual determination allow us to distinguish them from one another. Now, this difference is non conceptual, it's an internal difference, and it remains, that is, on the surface that includes the one and could not possibly include the other. So, if you could always imagine mirror images, how you have just one identity and one concept, and and you think you've captured a thing in its singularity, but the moment you have a mirror image of that, you will not be able to. You will have two different objects within different space and time coordinates. So, and then but for Deleuze, there is no pure form of space, pure form of intuition, because he feels that even the intuited concept of space is itself generated in the cauldron of ideas. And this is something that he'll bring in the, I think, in the end of the preface, where he talks about differential calculus, and he'll draw from Leibniz, but he'll talk about vanishing disappearance. This is something that we'll deal with later, but just a glimpse of where he's going with space. So he critiques Kant's notion of pure space and pure forms of space and time, where he says that ideas are not pure form but the pre-spatial intensive fields. And space and time he considers extensive, and so there's need to be an ontogenesis. So you cannot just take space and time as a pure form of intuitions. You have to go to the genesis of space and times. So you have to go to the genesis of conditions that conditions space and time in the first place. So this is something that Leibniz, he draws from Leibniz's infinitesimal calculus, which we'll deal with later. And continual repetitions that generate space in which our minds begin to categorize, conceptualize, and naturalize them into objects that, according to our orders of generality, fit onto a scale of taxonomy of resemblances. And you can refer to Kant's essay concerning the ultimate foundation of the differentiation of regions in space, which is a debate where he brings us this incongruent counterparts to critique Leibniz's notion of conceptual difference. And then last natural blockage is the concept of freedom or repression, and where he's just trying to show how conceptual difference is not possible. So he's critiquing Kant. So he's critiquing Leibniz here. So he will bring in Hegel's in itself for itself to the distinction between memory, and he distinguishes between memory and resemblance. So memory is anything that is unreflected and solidified sense of events as we presume they occurred. So it's pure past, it's just there. And remembrance is something that is active reconstruction of our relation to the past and to our lives. So there's a consciousness principle there. So the in itself of memory, that is just there, will be opposed to the for itself of remembrance, where there's an active manipulation or reconstruction of the memory and how it associates with our lived lives, or lived life. Now, in for itself memory could have infinity of predicates and comprehensions, but for Deleuze, most memories lack this for itself of consciousness recognition, thus the in itself of memory. So for Deleuze, memory most of the times is just buried there. It's not for itself, it's always in itself, it's just pure past. So when the consciousness of knowledge or the working through of memory is missing, as is usual in our day-to-day lives, the knowledge in itself is only the repetition of its object. For example, now he'll draw from Freud here and the Oedipal complex, for example, and he talked of repression. So what Freud is trying to do, he's dealing with like all the traumas or traumas that happen to you, you repress and you sort of just like repeat them in your action in your day-to-day lives without actually going to the in itself of your pure past. Pure past. So that remains in itself. The trauma or the memory remains in itself, and then that is repressed, and that is how you repeat. So in daily life, you repeat that action. For example, in Oedipal complex, you try to search for a woman that resembles your mother, so you keep repeating your action. but that repetition is also very negative for Deleuze because it functions on a negative definition of repetition, which is that of repression. And then, according to Freud, this happens due to repression or resistance. Now, for Deleuze, although it serves as a rather useful, even if negative model of repetition, this forgetting or repression is an example of natural blockage for Deleuze. Natural blockage is anything that just happens without us actually doing it. So, artificial blockage is real, it's useful because we do it in terms of categorizing things to make our lives better and classifying or taxonomical differentiation. But natural blockage is anything that happens by default. So, it just happens without us even knowing it, how we just view the world, right? And how we act. And memories without remembrance are thus concepts of freedom as they belong to free faculty but not me. So, free faculty again for Deleuze is something that is pure past, it's in itself, and it is something that dictates our repetitions in real life. And we never have access to free faculty. Most of the things that we do in life, or most of the times we act, we were just like unaware of that free faculty that dictates our repetition and actions in life. So repression is the operation of free faculty of mind, free because it exceeds the control of consciousness and operates without our consent or will. And the free faculty is played, that is, to say repeated, enacted instead of being known. So we always enact or we always repeat that we repress, and we actually do not come to know of it. So there's hardly a for itself. And in Greek, theater becomes very important for Deleuze here because he discusses further that what happens in Greek tragedy or Greek theater is the in itself and the for itself come together. So the representation and the repetition comes together. So what happens with Oedipus in the end of the play is where he realizes that whatever he was repeating because he was dictated by this free faculty, which is of that of pure past. So that is when your representation of the pure past and your repetition try to make sense. And then that is very important because there's a recognition there. And Aristotle will call it recognition that ultimately leads to catharsis or denouement in Greek theater. And then the I, which is the pure faculty, and the I that I think I am, the I that I think I am is whatever you mean by the identity that you think that you have. And regulated, which is regulated, and it is something that repeats without recognition. Now this is a natural blockage for Deleuze. And then till now, we've been discussing just conceptual blockages from viewpoints of natural blockage and artificial blockage, and in which the ideal conceptual ratio of comprehension to extension is blocked by something. That is, we can never get to extension is equal to one, no matter how much we try. And these instances of blockages form a negative definition of repetition. Although repetition is happening in case of repression, also in case of natural blockages of concepts of nature, concepts of freedom, and even in discrete extension, there is repetition that is happening in terms of identity, but that repetition is always negative. It's never repetition that brings about a difference because it's within the conceptual realm again. So a true repetition can only be something that is non-conceptual and is something that is defined by difference. A true repetition will always bring about difference. And then this is something that Deleuze will build on later towards the end of the preface, where he discusses signs and repetition. And then he'll bring in sign and he'll bring in Proust, remembrances, and etc. We'll deal with that later. As long as we continue to function within the order of generality to pin down what makes a thing that uh, the thing that we will never be able to get to the notion of singularity of that thing will never be experienced as a difference. Within generality, repetition will always be understood as an approximation or a way to make sense of the extrinsic difference between objects represented by the same concept. So, the identity principle which subsumes the differences. Deleuze will attempt to formulate a concept of difference, that is, difference in itself, difference that repeats. Unfolding of the singularity constitutes a dramatization of ideas. So, again, we're not going into dramatization of ideas there because this is something that we'll deal with separately. And then I think for today, I'll just keep it very brief because my aim today was just to explain what he means by blockages in terms of repetition and generality. And in the next, we will take his critique of Freud. He'll bring in pleasure principle, he'll bring in the death drive, because I think that requires me to read Freud as well. I haven't engaged much with Freud myself. So, in the next session, maybe we could continue with Freud and his critique of repression and also his conception of repetition in terms of signs and event. So I'll just keep it very brief and yeah, we can. And this is a list of suggested readings if you guys are interested. Uh, yeah, thank you. Hello. Hello, is Mohit back? Sure. Right. Wait a sec. Does anybody have any questions, any queries? Because this is something that is, this part of Deleuze, difference in repetition is very impenetrable. It took me a lot of time to even understand this. So whatever minimum understanding I have of him, I've just presented, and I suggest that you guys go and just read it for yourself because that will make more sense.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Abhay. Yes.
Hi. Hello. I got a question. So, when I more or less I get the idea of like you discussing like what the definition of a blockage is as like um, something that encapsulates something but leaves out like a portion of it, and that constitutes the blockage, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, just as an example, in order to like, because like Deleuze considers himself like as a very pure metaphysician, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, his concepts are often like they're very abstract, to put it in a like way. But I think the a lot of Deleuzian studies has been that like even the abstractness of it like finds a lot of application, right?
Yeah.
So just as an example, if you can, if it's possible, can you illustrate as just as an example how ideology uh, works as a blockage? Can you know, does the question make sense?
Yeah. Ideology works in the blockage. Yeah, ideology works as a blockage because it's not able to maybe capture the singularity of any school, right? Matlab, if you talk ideology works for people, right? If even within feminism there are different schools, right? There's intersectionality and there's black feminism, there's white feminism, and then third wave, first, fourth wave, etc., and then Dalit women, and so even an ideology cannot capture the singularity of the participants or whatever that it's talking about. I think that's when the concept is blocked. Feminism as a concept gets blocked the moment you uh, uh, yeah, it remain within the realm of generality and within the realm of resemblances. You,
Right, that makes sense.
yeah,
So just building on that, um, so just like just drawing in from like this discussion of, because so like if you take the idea of the rhizome, right?
yeah,
So what I think the rhizome brings into question is that it constitutes a horizontal structure,
yeah, yeah,
right? So it's different from, so the idea is that like when you have a binary kind of structure, the kind of, you know, like Levi Strauss and basically your I don't know, the classical structuralism, like how it's built up, it basically
right,
situates something at the center and like then builds everything else around it. So there is always a binary that manifests, right?
right,
So it's
right,
it's it's a sort of a vertical organization. So in that
right,
sense, Deleuze would call it like arboreal in like Thousand Plateaus. So in that
yeah,
sense, like the rhizome is a horizontal. So how I have always understood rhizome is the fact that, let's say for example, you have a strawberry plant, right? So once you um, so once you sow the seeds of the strawberry or whatever, so what happens is that not only does it grow in itself, but it also like grows horizontally and gives rise to others. So
Right.
what happens when you like come in the next day and there is an entire bed of strawberries, like whatever the time it takes for them to grow. So I think how the rhizome problematizes the centralized binaries is that you can't know what the first what
Yeah.
is the exact one that you've like first planted, right? So
Right.
in that sense, the idea of the arboreal being the singular, as in as when you have a conceptualization that one thing always draws from the other,
Yeah.
and therefore it like it takes precedence as to where it came from. So
Yeah.
that gets problematized. So when you're talking about like in just keeping this definition of the rhizome in mind, so what it actually does is that while it puts you in like a upper dimension in the sense that you can't really, it doesn't matter which was the first strawberry plant, whether or not it's there, it is obviously there, but the knowledge of that particular firstness is not useful anymore.
Yeah.
So is there some way you would read the like how blockages manifest, as in how they, because I don't think the does Deleuze also like have some sort of conceptualization that even though you can't capture it, like does in his philosophy would there be a complete like do you tend towards a complete encapsulation, and if yes, how would the rhizome in like does this loss of the first in the rhizome, how does this account for, like I'm not sure if like my question made sense, but
Complete encapsulation. So for Deleuze, that's impossible. You cannot because if you again, if you remain in the realm of generality, if you just like if you try to like capsulate it through concepts, you cannot do that because language itself it ends, right. Language itself is within the domain of generality, as we discussed in the discrete extension part, right.
right,
So when you have words to capture something, you cannot do that because it will always evade, and the more you try to do it, you increase the extension, right. So the number of entities within that word will start to increase. So you
right,
can never try to capture a thing in its concept, right. You can, but he's not trying to capture anything. He's just like to show how difference in itself, or what Leibniz was trying to do. He thought he got to a notion of like conceptual difference, and I've captured the thing its singularity. That also lacks. So he's not trying to do that, but he'll build up on that. He'll talk about ideas which, so this is all within the realm of extension, right. But
right,
in intensive, right, how something new comes about, how difference is not subsumed under identity, but how difference dictates identity. So that difference, so there is always difference first for Deleuze, as opposed to identity first and then difference comes after, right. So we'll talk about identity ideas which are intensive, and this gives rise to something new and something novel. So how, so he's a philosopher of new, how something new always comes about. So in the rhizome, it's always like, it's so widespread, it's always new. So as you rightly pointed out, nothing starts here and ends there, so there's no cause and effect. And this is like something that he draws from Spinoza also a lot, when Spinoza is getting to his affection and three types of knowledges, right. So he's focused on the affect more and less on the cause. Cause is
right.
always subsidiary, right. So you get to the affect, and when you study the affect, you will automatically get to the nature of cause, right. So yeah, affections and affects are prior for Deleuze as opposed to, yeah.
So, last question, like, this idea of difference, uh, is this in synergy with like Derrida's difference?
No, no, no. I think they're doing a very different. So these are true tangents in philosophy, right? So Derrida is a very Hegelian. He's
Yeah,
post-Hegelian, doing a lot of stuff that Hegel was doing. So their influence are very different. So he will draw from Leibniz's infinitesimal calculus. Although they're trying to do the same, they're trying to capture the concept in its singularity. Hegel is also doing that through synthesis, antithesis, thesis. But what he will build on Leibniz, but he'll take it further, right? So he'll bring in the yeah. But Derrida is more of a transcendental philosopher, right? So when he talks about relativity of words, right, how it's always differing, difference or deconstruction. So he's again, I think, operating within the realm of relationality and resemblances and concepts. But Deleuze is not doing that. Yeah, he's going inside.
that makes
Derrida
sense.
is going outside. So transcendence and immanence. So philosopher of immanence as opposed to Derrida, who's a transcendent philosopher. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else? We can stop here now then for today. All right. Thanks everybody for joining in. I'll see you next week, and we'll continue with the preface again. Uh, yeah, thanks for your time. See you next week. Bye bye.